Welcome to another edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm Anton Paras.
And this is the podcast where we discuss hyped up, somewhat disappointing films. We'll introduce the film. We'll tell you why it was chosen for this podcast. We'll tell you how it got made. And then we'll provide a few reasons that answer the question, why wasn't it better? Just some quick admin before we get into things. We are now on Spotify and Google Podcasts, with more streaming platforms to come. If you have not already done so, please give us a like, a follow, a 5-star rating, and don't forget to tell your friends about us. As far as social media goes, we do have a Twitter. Please give us a follow at WWIB Podcast. And if you'd like to get in touch with us directly with any questions, comments, or general feedback, you can email us at wwibpodcast@gmail.com. Anton, this is a very special episode. Joining us today is our very first guest ever in the history of this podcast.
All right.
Eric,
applause all around.
Thank you.
Eric Taylor.
Thank you.
Eric is not only our producer, but he is also a music composer, and you can find him on Spotify under the name Might Be Thunder. Eric, welcome.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here, gentlemen. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about movies. And as we know, one of many prestigious guests that will be on the future of the podcast. So, like I said, I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. It will be hard to top the prestige that you bring. Before we introduce...
Yeah, I was looking at our list. I don't know if I can book Halle Berry next week, but...
Oh, I can help you with that.
I really wanted to get Halle Berry when we covered Die Another Day.
Oh, all right. Well,
For
let
sure,
me check my
you know.
Rolodex and see what we got.
Yeah. Before we get into the movie that we're going to discuss, Eric, is there anything you want to plug or promote? Did I do a good job of telling the listeners who you are? Did I screw it up?
No, you're doing a great job. You give me a shout out every single time, which is much loved. The only other thing, I mean, I'm about to release another project. It's more like a ARG, like an augmented reality game sort of thing.
Okay.
There's going to be a bunch of videos on YouTube, which I haven't figured out exactly it's going to be a separate thing, but the music of Might Be Thunder tells the story that this ARG is going to be. So I'm working on that, but that's the only thing that I could plug. If you follow me at Might Be Thunder on Instagram, you'll get all the updates for that.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I know that, you produce our podcast, and I asked you casually, like, if you ever wanted to appear on an episode, let me know. And Eric, you were like, well, let me take a look at the list of films, and just so the listeners know, we have a huge list of all the films that we eventually want to cover.
Extensive.
And then it is extensive. And then we have a short list of stuff that we want to cover on the first season of Why Wasn't It Better? So I sent Eric the list of the first season, and he immediately, without hesitation, picked out The Lost World, Jurassic Park.
Ooh, what a choice.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is, of course, it's a no-brainer for this podcast. It was something we always wanted to do.
And cards on the table, there's a lot of nostalgia there. Like, I remember watching Jurassic Park on VHS, but we had recorded it. So no matter what the season was, if I wanted to watch Jurassic Park, I was watching like Christmas commercials, like the old 90s Christmas Coca-Cola commercials and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But, I was excited to do this movie because I think it gets a terrible rap, and I don't agree with it.
Well, let's
fair enough.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in, take a dinosaur-size chomp into this meaty film.
Anton, would you like to introduce the movie?
Patrick, I would love to. So, diving into this film with the overview, the Lost World Jurassic Park was released on May 23rd, 1997 by Universal Pictures and Amblin Entertainment, directed by the legendary Steven Spielberg, screenplay by David Kopp, based on the novel by Michael Crichton. Starring Jeff Goldblum, Julianne Moore, Pete Postlethwaite, Arliss Howard, Vince Vaughn, and Vanessa Lee Chester, with a budget of $73 million, so about $136 million adjusted for inflation, with a box office at 618 million, so 1.15 billion adjusted for inflation. So not missing for any pennies.
I thought I'd
So
include that detail.
yeah. So to give that plot overview, billionaire John Hammond summons chaos theorist Ian Malcolm to his home with some startling information. While nearly everything at his Jurassic Park had been destroyed, his engineers happen to have a second site where other dinosaurs were kept in hiding. And it seems the dinosaurs on the second island are alive and well and even breeding. And Hammond wants Malcolm to observe and document them before Hammond's financiers can get to them. Of course, thank God for Site B.
So as far as why this movie was chosen, we kind of teased this in the intro. This is an easy choice for this podcast. There's been so many sequels that have come out since, but this was at the time one of the most highly anticipated sequels of all time. It was, of course, the sequel to Jurassic Park, which it's easy to forget this now, but going into the summer of 1997, outside of the original Star Wars and E.T., Jurassic Park was probably the biggest movie ever. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that. When this sequel was announced based on Crichton's first ever sequel novel, expectations were sky high. And just to emphasize this a little bit more, Jurassic Park, the first one, it made $1 billion in 1993 money, which is multiple movies released every year now that make $1 billion plus. But back then, it was unheard of. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that I'd say going into 1997, this was probably the most hyped movie of all time at that time. And this is, of course, our very first Steven Spielberg movie, the most successful filmmaker of all time by any measurable metric. Spielberg's stock had never been higher than it was right before this movie came out, especially after the triumph for him that was 1993. And just my own personal memory of this film, The Lost World, this and Independence Day are the very first movies that I can remember being personally excited for. Just like Eric, just like you said, I had so much nostalgia, just like rewatching even the trailer for this. Most people expected this to eclipse the original and what they expected it to become the highest grossing movie of all time. And it made a lot of money, but it was immediately seen as inferior to the original. And its reputation, I don't think, has changed much over the years. And this actually did hold the record for the biggest opening weekend in movie history from May 1997 until November 2001, when it was surpassed by which movie?
Spider-Man.
No.
Dang it.
Wait, what year? What year was it?
November 2001 is when this got, the box office opening weekend record got broken.
Lord of the Rings?
Close.
Was that in 2000? Oh,
it was in 2001. You're so close.
Harry Potter?
Yep.
Oh!
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the first Harry Potter. Anton, what's your memory of this movie?
It was hype, definitely. I think that the nostalgia of it, from my perspective, was very, very strong. This was a franchise that, when I was younger, massive appeal as a young boy for dinosaurs, lots of action, and going to the movie theaters and seeing all of that. I definitely am a big fan of the Jurassic Park franchise, specifically the first two movies. I think that when I think of this film in particular, it also was a great opportunity to just continue on with that same excitement for the franchise. Admittedly, the first time that I saw this film was on VHS. I did not get to see the film originally in theaters, but I was very excited to see the film on VHS. And after revisiting, well, we can dive more into that later. But I do want to invite Eric. I know this is a very special movie to you. Can you tell us more about your memory of this movie?
For sure. Yeah. So I was 6 when this movie came out, so I didn't go see it in theaters. It's funny, Patrick, that you said Independence Day and this movie, because I remember them both having those like holographic moving covers. You remember where it's Independence Day is like the White House, and then, but we had the VHS, and I remember just every day playing the movie. You know what I mean? If I was unable to watch the movie, I was upset, which is interesting because I was 6 years old, and a man does get ripped in half at one point in the movie.
Yes.
So it was an interesting, but I was also super into dinosaurs. I can still name dinosaurs.
What's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, wow. No one's ever actually asked me that. That's so interesting. I gotta be honest, it always was baryonyx, because for a while, all we had in the fossil record for baryonyx was their claws. Like, that was all that we had. So I thought it was like a super mysterious sort of dinosaur. So that I would say is because it was the mystery. And the fact of the matter was, and still is, that surprisingly enough, we're still learning about dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a super cool topic. And I think that the way that the Jurassic Park movies, and the books, I mean, I remember my dad reading the books to me, like as my bedtime story. So again, a little messed up when you think about because the book is, have you guys read the books at all?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The books are way more violent, violent than the movie.
Turned out fine.
What's that?
We turned out fine, right?
I guess, depending on your definitions.
Look, there's always hope in the book, because Ian Malcolm, they bring him back.
They do. And admittedly, I haven't actually read The Lost World, but my wife and I did Spark Notes it. So, it deviates a lot from the book, but I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Fun facts there. Yeah.
Yes. Baryonyx. I don't know what that is. Sounds like a Pokemon.
I actually just pulled it up. It's it almost has like an alligator style mouth.
Yeah, okay. It's like Spinosaurus without a spine. It was a fishing dinosaur similar to Spinosaurus. In the newer films, Baryonyx does make an appearance.
That makes a lot of sense why I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, I'm a little bit older. I did see this in the theater. I was not disappointed as a kid. I was, of course, wowed by it.
Of course.
I saw the first Jurassic Park when I was way too young. I was probably 5 years old when I saw it, and that's not a good movie for a 5-year-old. It's not.
I think that's how old I was when I started watching it. I loved it.
I love parts of it, and then other parts of it, there's a reason why. These are curious movies because they're certainly marketed towards kids, right, but they're not really kids movies.
Right. Well, I think part of it is the plausibility, right? Like a lot of tension in a lot of movies is the fact that, like, oh, this could happen, but there's very little way that a dinosaur could come to life again, Right. So,
but that is the best thing about Crichton's writing, I think, is that he presents this concept to you, and especially if you read the books, you'll get an appreciation for this even more than the films.
For sure.
He presents this scientific concept to you that seems so utterly convincing that when you finish the book, you're like, why haven't they cloned dinosaurs? Why haven't we done this already?
That's true.
Anton, tell us about the production history of this movie.
Gladly. Well, after the release of the novel Jurassic Park in 1990, even before the movie adaptation came out, Michael Crichton was under pressure from fans for a sequel. Having never written one, he initially refused. So, of course, on behalf of Spielberg, Universal acquired the film rights for $1.5 million before the first novel was even published. So that's how sure they were about this film being a hit. Sure. So note, there was never supposed to be a sequel. Let's just kind of simmer on that for a moment.
Crichton wasn't a sequel guy. He wasn't a sequel guy.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Timeline 2 wouldn't have made sense.
And that sucks because it happens a lot to writers. I mean, one of my favorite sci-fi is the Eon series by, I think it's Greg Bear. And they forced him to write a third book. And you can tell they forced him to write a third book, So you're right. It's kind of shooting yourself in the foot before even getting to the starting line.
I have another really good example of this same situation that I'll talk about later on.
But numbers say a lot. Jurassic Park went on to become the highest-grossing movie ever at the time, earning $1 billion in 1993 money. So that's $2 billion today. Thank you, inflation. That same year, he also released Schindler's List, which finally won him his coveted Academy Award. And we have a love-hate relationship with the Academy here. Spielberg in 1993, unquestionably the highest peak a filmmaker has ever had or will have. We don't expect anyone surpassing this level of success. And
No.
Patrick Spielberg,
No.
who like
we take him for granted.
Of directors.
Yeah. Think about this for a second. Imagine if also in 2008, Christopher Nolan also made a movie about the Holocaust that won Best Picture in addition to making The Dark Knight. That is the 1993 that Spielberg had. There's no way any filmmaker's going to pass that.
Yeah, no, huge. That first film, that kicked off Michael Crichton mania. Between 1992 and 99, pretty much anything he was publishing got greenlit for a movie adaptation. Mm-hmm. Jurassic Park, Rising Sun, Disclosure, Congo, The Lost World, finally coming to a screeching halt with Sphere and The 13th Warrior. You can kind of see there when the Crichton momentum started to slow down.
Yeah.
Are we gonna also cover a few of these movies on that list?
I want to cover all of them.
I was gonna say, doesn't Sphere have a really interesting and terrible production history?
It does.
Am I wrong about that? Yeah. Okay.
It does. It's a great book, and it's a disaster zone of a movie. And then this is a good question. So Anton, you just listed all the adaptations. Is Jurassic Park the only truly great adaptation of a Crichton book?
By definition of great, which we definitely equate with strong storytelling adapted to the screen and the numbers brought in and the acclaim, yes. Especially when you put it up against the rest of those films, yes.
Yeah, like I like Rising Sun a lot, but I can't defend it as a good movie.
I wanted to like Congo. I really wanted to.
Oh, Congo. Eric, you've seen Congo, right?
I have not. You're talking about a lot of movies that I haven't seen.
Oh, it's not good, but it is a hoot.
Is it bad good? Is it good bad good? You know what I mean?
It's not
bad,
enough. It's not enough bad good, but it is bad enough that it'll get kind of good.
Let me just put it to you this way. There is a gorilla played by a man in the suit who talks with a Nintendo Power Glove that talks in an automated voice.
Well, I already hate it.
Eric, you're excited. I can feel it.
Dude, I'm gonna have to get so drunk. It's like everybody gives me shit because I like to watch Ghost Adventures, but they don't understand that you have to play the drinking game to enjoy Ghost Adventures. And it's basically you just drink the whole time. And it just sounds like in order for me to enjoy that movie, I'm going to need to be drinking. To forget the fact that somebody was paid to make such an asinine concept come to life.
Well, let's continue on to see how did Crichton continue to influence films in the 90s. So in March 1994, Crichton said there would probably be a sequel to both the novel and film, saying he had a story idea for another novel, which would then be adapted into a film. And at the time, Spielberg had not committed to directing the new novel's film adaptation, as he planned to take a year off from directing. So at the time of the announcement, Spielberg had signed on to produce the film adaptation while filming to begin in summer 1996 for release in 97. Spielberg spent most of the time between 1993 and 1996 working on the foundation of DreamWorks. So no easy feat. A film studio, of course, co-founded with Katzenberg and David Geffen. So while The Lost World was made the foundation of DreamWorks, it was financed and released by Universal Pictures. Note, Amistad ended up being one of the very first films released by DreamWorks. Of course, a lot of great films have come out of the DreamWorks factory. Name a couple.
That's David Geffen, like Geffen Records? I did not know he was involved with DreamWorks. Wow.
Yes.
See, this is why I like this podcast, guys. I learned so much. I'm not lying about that. No,
The
seriously.
same factory of dreams that Shrek and Ants both came from. So
Who could forget ants?
Who could forget Shrek, dude?
Shrek's a
exactly.
The internet
genuine
won't
classic.
let us.
No, it won't.
No, it won't. No, it won't. And at that time, at the time of the announcement, Spielberg had not decided if he would direct the film, saying, I'd love to direct it, but I just have to see. My life's changing. So Joe Johnston originally offered to direct this film, but Spielberg eventually turned him down, saying he would direct the third one if there was one. Creatively, this decision ended up working for nobody, because Spielberg dislikes this movie, and Johnston got stuck directing a dumber, less successful movie that was Jurassic Park 3. So
I'm currently finishing a book called The Men Who Would Be King by Nicole Laporte. It is about the history of DreamWorks, and it goes into a lot of detail about Spielberg's motivations, as well as Katzenberg's and Geffen's, for wanting to run his own studio. Now, if any of the listeners aren't familiar with DreamWorks, Spielberg, he co-founded this studio at the peak of his career, and it's one of the all-time great power moves in entertainment history. I highly recommend this book. But because of the timeline that this book covers, there's a bit of info about the making of The Lost World. Now, Anton, as you just mentioned, he was initially hesitant about whether or not he actually wanted to direct this movie. Well, Universal made it pretty easy for him to make up his mind. They offered him 17.5% of the box office gross. Not the revenue, the gross. Meaning he got 17.5% of whatever the movie made before the studio started chopping up the profits. Just from this movie alone, not even including his salary, Spielberg got $108 million. Let that sink in. Pretty decent 1997 for him, I'd say.
Oh, for sure, dude. He would be stupid not to take that.
Yeah, this book also, it goes into a lot about all the stuff that he gets money from. He gets 2% of Universal theme parks ticket sales. He has that deal for life. That gets him about between 30 and 50 million a year just from that. He made 125 million just from the first Men in Black movie, just for having his name associated with it. He knows how to get paid. But
I wish
back to
that
this movie.
Yeah.
Right. So we know Spielberg, very successful man. He thought he could replicate that success he had 4 years prior. Release the moneymaker The Lost World in the summer and historical Oscar bait tearjerker Amistad during award season at year's end. So similar formula. And just a spoiler alert, neither The Lost World nor Amistad ended up being as successful as his 1993 films. So a production team was assembled in spring 1995 as Crichton was finishing the second novel, titled The Lost World. And simultaneously, Spielberg and Kopp were developing ideas for the screenplay. So Crichton's novel was published that September, while Spielberg officially announced that he would be directing the film in November.
Of course.
And he compiled approximately 1,500 storyboard ideas for the movie. There were only 62 CGI shots in the first film. Spielberg estimates there were about 200 in this one. Can we just say, what do we expect that budget to be?
It's amazing it didn't exceed 100 million. 73 million. It's pretty impressive.
And I just want to point out, like, I know Jurassic Park also does a lot of practical effects, but back then, people were given a lot of time to do CGI. So that's why a lot of like early 2000s CGI still holds up to current CGI because of basically it's a similar thing with video games, right? Crunch time. If you crunch, you're going to get a less quality product. So I just thought that was an interesting point to make. That's probably why, you know, it still looks good even though it was $73 million.
Yeah. No, it's actually an excellent point that you make, Eric, because you can, especially, you highlighted the early 2000s. Anton and I were talking about CGI in one of the previous movies that we covered, The Matrix Reloaded. You can really tell from that era which movies they had time to do it and which movies they didn't. And I read this thing about CGI on a Reddit post recently, and it was true back then and it holds true to this day. Generally, if you're a director and you're making a movie with a lot of CGI, the special effects company that you hire, they're going to tell you, okay, you can either have it fast, cheap, or good. Pick two.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. If you spend a lot of money, you can get it done quick and it'll be good. If you do it on the cheap, but if you have enough time, maybe it'll be good. But you can't have all three. Before we get into the reasons why this movie wasn't better, there was a quote I found from Spielberg during the making of this movie. He became disenchanted with it, admitting, quote, "I beat myself up, growing more and more impatient with myself. It made me wistful about doing a talking picture because sometimes I got the feeling I was just making a big silent roar movie. I found myself saying, is that all there is? It's not enough for me," end quote.
Big words.
So the very first reason why The Lost World wasn't better is the script. They began pre-production on this movie before Crichton's novel was even published, which to me is a bit of a red flag, and it makes you wonder, was the novel that they essentially bullied Crichton into writing, was it supposed to be a sequel to the original Jurassic Park novel or the film adaptation? The only reason the novel sequel exists at all is because of the success of the first movie. I mentioned earlier I had another example of this. This is the exact same scenario that would later happen with Hannibal, the sequel to The Silence of the Lambs. Author Thomas Harris, he only wrote the sequel after the success of the 1991 film, only after fans begged him for it. And David Kopp, or Kopp, we should probably know how to pronounce his name, Anton, since...
We should, but I like pronouncing it David Kopp.
I do too.
He's such great research.
He is a very famous screenwriter. He's worked on a lot of very famous stuff. David Kopp, whatever, he was given a year to write the script, and Spielberg said the middle portion of the novel was lacking in story narrative, but that Crichton's setup was excellent. Kopp said the plot of the 1962 film Hatari, who could forget that one, about African animals being captured for zoos, had a big influence on the Lost World script. After the novel was finished, Crichton, he was not consulted about the sequel film, and it was not until he declined to approve certain merchandising rights that he received a copy of the script. This is what I found pretty interesting. The film has almost very little in common with the book's plot, just some of the basic premise and a single set piece, like the Tyrannosaur versus the trailer. I wish Crichton had still been on board because he collaborated with the screenwriters on the first movie, and I think it would have benefited this one if he had been given the freedom to do so.
Yeah,
Any thoughts on that,
It's
Eric?
not uncommon. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Oh no, I was just saying that's a good point, and that was something that I noticed about, just kind of going over the plot of the book as opposed to the movie. They're really dissimilar. There isn't much connection between the book and the movie. At least, there's a kid that's a stowaway, but I think in the book there's two kids that are stowaways, and it's nobody's son or daughter. I'm not sure of the specifics, but it did seem like the plots are, and that makes sense, right? Because the book wasn't even finished, and they were making the script. So it's like, I guess they just had a general idea about what the book was gonna turn out to be. And the guy was just like, yeah, I'll go off that. Not saying it's the scriptwriter's fault, but that's interesting.
Well, even just a quick, modern example, even in the past decade, where we saw a medium take on when we have something really strong to be the backbone of the storyline. For example, Game of Thrones versus the last season that did not have the same stood up storyline that's been built on by the foundation of George R.R. Martin, we see quality suffer. So this is definitely just a very clear parallel to that.
I found it odd how much they pressured Crichton into writing a sequel, and then they chose to significantly deviate from the source material. It's like they didn't need the novel. They were going to make this anyway. I would love to ask them in hindsight, why'd you force him to make it if you didn't end up using his ideas anyway?
I know. And Jurassic Park 3 and all of Jurassic Park, the worlds are not based on any novels. They could have just made the movie without forcing him to write a novel.
I think ecosystem, if you have a lot of fans of Crichton already and you want to I figure you want to make sure that your marketing across all fronts is aligned with it was tied to the original book, and that we also have another book tied to it. It just makes sense from a studio point of view.
Yeah, and I could see a scenario too. This is just speculation, but Spielberg probably considered Crichton a friend and he just wanted to maintain the relationship and just asked him to, it's probably how it went. Because I think one of the issues with this script is the characterization and the behavior of certain characters. Jacob Hall of Slash Film, he negatively compared it to Spielberg's 1984 film Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And he wrote that the Lost World transforms, quote, intelligent characters into bumbling idiots, increases the volume and the chaos while dialing back the mystery and the awe, and replaces excitement with violence and cruelty, end quote.
Well, yeah, but we've already had the awe. We've already had the awe in the first movie, where they see the Brontosaurus and they're seeing all the dinosaurs all the time. Like we've had all that in the first movie. I mean, my response to that is, why wouldn't the second movie do something completely different? The violence thing, dude, a guy gets eaten off of a toilet in the first movie. You know what I mean?
I actually agree with you.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with taking the sentiment of wanting to have the sentiment of being able to use violence as part of the film's storytelling is one thing, but having violence just be an add-on part to sell the movie without having the same substance as it did in the first film, I think is what's probably more of the sentiment in this quote. Like, there's just violence to really draw in the viewers versus being able to really use it as part of the plot, continuation of the plot.
I mean, that I don't want to get too bogged down here, but that really confuses me because that's suggesting that the first movie isn't violent, and it is. I mean, and Ellie Sattler in the first movie is like, these are creatures that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll react violently. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that, when we go in and start messing around with the T-Rex's baby, that they won't rip a guy in half. I mean, we would kind of expect that of a lion or tiger, right? If we were messing with their baby. So I don't know. I take issue with that quote and kind of that sentiment, because I think it's logical that dinosaurs would be violent. And I understand what you're saying. Like, it detracts from real substance, I guess, but it's not hostile. It's not Saw. You know what I mean? That's just gratuitous violence for the sake of gratuitous violence. I don't know. I'm already hyped to defend this movie, dude. I'm so sorry.
This is why I was excited. This is why I was excited when you said you wanted to talk about this movie. Why deviate so much from the source material when it worked so successfully the first time? They kind of went their own way with it, and I did a lot of research, and I can't really find a clear explanation for why they deviated so much from it. One of my notes here, why would you take a bunch of Mercedes on an island expedition?
Because they were sponsored by Mercedes.
Because Mercedes is the vehicle of the Jurassic Park franchise.
I don't know, dude, but like, here's the thing. Like, I had such a big crush on a girl in high school who was like older, like 2 years older than me, right? And like drove one of those Mercedes SUVs. That's why I had a crush on her. You feel me? Like, it's just so tied. But I mean, okay, cool. You say that, but in the Jurassic World movies, they're driving even nicer Mercedes around the island. It makes even less sense than the like rugged Mercedes that they have.
We spared no expense.
Yeah, dude, and this is the guy that spares no expense. Of course he's gonna like what is he gonna set him up with, a Jeep? Are you kidding me? No, they're gonna set him up with Mercedes. That's definitely, I would never buy a Mercedes, but
the primary dessert in the cafeteria is Jell-O.
Yeah,
they had a lot of desserts there.
Jell-O was a big deal in the 80s and 90s, though. It's not now. It's just fallen out of favor.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah, people used to get real excited for Jell-O. Oh, yeah. So
the reason they did Jell-O because of the shaking, dude.
What is our second reason why this wasn't better?
The uneven characters. They originally wrote Grant into the movie, but when Sam Neill, love me some Sam Neill, declined to return, they rewrote everything for Malcolm, which, I thought was a pretty good. I really do like the Ian Malcolm character.
Yeah, I think that worked out well.
Yeah, I think so. Goldblum is a treasure. Jeff Goldblum was a lead in the first film, but not the lead. Do we think Goldblum was capable of being a lead in this sequel? So the filmography for Goldblum is a bit nutty to look at. And a lot of films going back to the 1970s, some are a lot of not so good, but in the 90s, he's in 3 of some of the biggest films of all time: Jurassic Park, The Lost World, and Independence Day. We still wouldn't necessarily put him as an A-list movie star. Basically a character actor who happened to be the co-lead in literally 2 of the biggest movies of all time. Shouts out to my man Goldblum.
Yeah, he
received a free M-Class SUV from Mercedes for this film. So as of 2011, it was still his personal vehicle.
Yeah, I saw that on an episode of Top Gear. He's like, "Yep, I got this for being in the Lost World, and I'm still driving it." He has had a bizarre career.
Shocking really that a Mercedes lasted that long. Have you seen his new? I think it's on Disney Plus, but it's the world according to Jeff Goldblum. I'm pretty sure.
I have not.
No.
Oh, it's worth it. It's so worth it. It's just him. Like the first episode is him like getting into the world of sneakers and collecting sneakers. And it's like he goes like very mundane topics. He talks about dogs. I love Jeff Goldblum.
Oh yeah.
Okay?
Two things on Goldblum for me. One, listeners, if you haven't seen Cronenberg's The Fly, it's I think that was his best film for depicting the main character in The Fly. And 2, there is a really hilarious set of commercials that Goldblum did for Max in like the late 90s, early 2000s. I'll try to find a YouTube clip of this, but seeing him with his particular cadence talking about the different Macs coming out and what they're capable of is just a joy and a treasure. So I'm going to try to find that clip and send it out. But that's me. That's me on Goldblum.
He really does have an interesting career. I'm glad you highlighted it. I do like him in The Fly, by the way. I agree with you. And then he's in just a lot of supporting roles, and yet 2 of the biggest movies of all time. Bizarre. I like what he's doing here.
He's in a lot of supporting roles, but he's the main character of his own life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Goldblum is the main character.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But like, that's the thing is that like, yeah, he pretty much just like when you watch these old movies, you're like, and you see him now, you're just like, he's just playing himself. Is he acting?
He's like a nerdier cousin of Robert Downey Jr.
Accurate.
To go back to, why wasn't it better in terms of assessing Goldblum, there was a very much a hard carry in this film from his perspective. Like he was very much carrying a lot of that weight as one of the stronger actors in this film.
Yeah, I like what he's doing here. I think he definitely carries the movie. He's cool and smart. I really wish the other characters were as smart as he was, because my issue with the characters in this movie, Anton, is for every good character, there's 2 stupid ones.
But we did have the return of John Hammond, which was great, was it not, Patrick?
Yeah, maybe. I think it was kind of amusing how he's like, "Ian, you're a mathematician. Why don't you go check out this dinosaur island for me?" The mathematician is ironically the only person in the movie with common sense. None of the characters who are alleged animal experts, they don't really seem to know what they're doing, except for one other one. And he might be the MVP of this movie other than Goldblum, and that is Pete Postlethwaite. He plays Roland Tembo, the game hunter who accompanies the InGen. He's a great character. He's definitely my favorite character in the movie besides Ian Malcolm.
But an avatar for a rehashed version of Muldoon, right?
Yes. Yes, he is. But at least he has a character arc where he's initially leading the expedition. He's very gung-ho about wanting to hunt a tyrannosaur. And by the end of the movie, he becomes disillusioned because his friend dies and he doesn't want to work with InGen. So at least he has a character arc. They actually... Of all the characters in the movie that were so-called written, he was probably the best written of them.
I love the last thing he says, where he's like, where the InGen guy is like, "Hey, you've got a place at the park," and he's like, "No, spent far too much time around the company of death." It's just
good line, definitely good line.
Good line.
Good line.
And like, I agree with you guys to a certain extent, but like, Jeff Goldblum's the main character. Of course, all the other characters are going to kind of come up short. While I understand what you're saying about like people lacking common sense, like logistically, yeah, it's stupid to bring a baby tyrannosaur back to your camp. But, you know, there's one guy's in Greenpeace. One woman is like very about conservation and keeping these predators alive, you know.
Julianne Moore.
Well, I was going to say, like, just because the main character has a strong lead doesn't necessarily have the other characters in the film be able to also carry the plot along with their acting. Every piece has a part in telling the story. Now, Patrick, you just mentioned Julianne Moore, also very, very successful in her own right. You want to talk
Great
us
actress.
through the Julianne Moore character?
Yeah, she is a great actress, and she's entirely forgettable in this movie. Almost nobody remembers that she's in this movie. She later admitted that she only accepted the role. She did want to work with Spielberg, but she also had to pay for a divorce. Here's my issue with her character. She's supposed to be a scientist. She's supposed to be an animal behavioral expert, but she deliberately interferes with the subject she's studying at almost every chance she gets. It would make her a terrible scientist in real life, but at the same time she's interfering, she's lecturing the others, namely Vince Vaughn, about not interfering. And then she immediately almost gets killed by a stegosaur for messing with their baby. And like I mentioned, to Vince Vaughn's character, his character's name's Nick Van Owen, she says, quote, "We're here to document, not interact," end quote. But all she does for the rest of the movie is interact with the dinosaurs. And now in the baby T-Rex, I'm glad you brought that up, Eric. In the novel, her character, her name's Sarah Harding, she tells them straight up, like, it has a broken leg, just shoot it, it's going to die. They only help it because Eddie, who is played by Richard Schiff, the guy that gets later torn in half, he would later go on to be I believe, the communications director of the White House under President Martin Sheen. He's not a scientist in this movie, though. He really upgraded it after he got ripped in half. But so in the novel, his character, he couldn't shoot the T-Rex, and he brings it back in secret, and that's why that unfolds in the novel. It makes a lot more sense. But in the movie, she and Vince Vaughn bring it back, which is a very stupid move. And she goes on to make a big deal about how T-Rexes can track anyone that's in their territory, and then she proceeds to just gallivant around in the forest with the baby T-Rex's blood still on her clothes. And she hangs it up in her tent. It's idiotic.
That's a fair assessment. I'll concede to you on that point. But I don't think that she's entirely forgettable in this movie, because the only reason that they're even on the island in the first place is because she goes to the island in the first place. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Like,
but when you think of this movie, do you think you're like, oh, Julianne Moore?
Well, no. But at the same time, but like, that's my point. You're not really supposed to. I mean, she is a supporting character. And I will concede to your point. Like, that makes a lot more sense. And it would make a lot more karmic sense if... And maybe that's why they changed it in the movie, so that the average viewer, and I hate saying that because I hate appealing to the lowest common denominator, but like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, the average viewer will now feel bad for a guy that died because he was trying to save his friends, not necessarily a T-Rex. And frankly, I know you guys probably haven't seen like the World Series and stuff like that, but like, I feel like the T-Rex is almost a character you root for because it's a representation of the absolute hubris of all the people that brought it into existence in the first place. And it's just eating them right up. I see you thinking over there. You're gonna prove me wrong, both of you.
No, I agree with you that the T-Rex is a character that people eventually came to root for, especially when you're confronted with what the Raptors represented versus the T-Rex. You're like, well, at least the T-Rex is a little more friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But the other, as far as, look, we talked about the characters we liked. We didn't like Julianne Moore's character. My other issue with the character in this movie, the main villain played by Arliss Howard, I think he's very weak. A better actor was needed here. I don't think he's well written. He's one-dimensional, almost bordering on cartoonish. And I challenge you, what is his name?
Fair.
Peter
John
Ludlow.
Hammond's nephew.
All right, I'll give you credit. You knew that. His name's Peter Ludlow.
I know.
He's played by, I just don't think, a very good actor. And then when you realize they originally offered the role to Gary Oldman, who had to turn it down due to scheduling conflicts. What a missed opportunity.
Oh, no. Don't tell me that.
Wouldn't that have been great? Lot more nuance with the character.
He would have brought so much more. And I couldn't find out which movie he had the conflict with, but there was another movie that Gary Oldman played the villain in that came out around the same time, and I think it's that one. It's Air Force One. I think that's the movie that he had the conflict with.
Okay.
But I would have much rather seen him in this. He would have made a great villain in this.
Yeah. So my take on that is like, yes, he's not a memorable character, whatever. But like, he's supposed to be this absolute wet noodle that does not deserve the position that he's in. Like, the core of the Jurassic Park series is hubris, right? Human hubris. It's just the idea, well, I made these things, I should be able to control them. And you even see that when he dies at the end. He's like, no, wait. He's trying to control these animals that they created, but they didn't really create it. I mean, I get what you're saying and the fact that the character in and of themselves is not memorable, but I just see all the nepotism in corporate America where like a bunch of idiots are basically running their great-great-granddad's companies and they don't understand the responsibility that they're given, and the only thing that they see is making money. But they think they're real cool and badass. Like when he's like, "Oh, don't touch this suit. It's worth more than you are," you know. And
yes.
I honestly, I feel like it's a lot of retribution for people like that. That generally, let's be honest, don't get retribution.
Right. I don't disagree with you. I think my take here is that theme and being able to tell that story was told very effectively in the first film. You're rehashing it in film too. How are you going to do it effectively?
But I feel like he was still really different from John Hammond.
He was. Here's my issue with him. It's not just the actor. Arliss Howard, nothing against him. First of all, he's an American playing an Englishman. It's usually supposed to work the other way around. But here's my issue with the character. This feeds into my issues with the script and them not using the source material that they had. Why wouldn't they just bring back the Dodgson character from the first movie? He's the guy that gives Nedry the shaving cream canister. He's the villain in the book. I don't understand why they wouldn't bring him back. Dodgson did not return in this movie, and it doesn't make any sense to replace him with an original villain in Peter Ludlow. They completely wrote out the competing company, Biosyn. That is the company that lands on Site B in the novel with all of the helicopters and the equipment, and they're trying to raid the island. I don't understand why they would deviate and not use that.
I just want to say, before you continue, this is very interesting that you say that, because Dodgson is the bad guy in the final Jurassic World movie, and Biosyn are the bad guys in Jurassic World Dominion. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but because you haven't seen those movies, it's very important that you know.
No, that's interesting.
That you're right. That you're right, and eventually they did that. And I also concur with. I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
I think one of the things the first movie does better than this one is that there almost isn't a real villain. Like, it's sort of Nedry, but he's just a vehicle for the chaos of the park. The park is the real, like, chaos is the real villain in the original. And this movie, they try very hard to make Ludlow the villain, and he's just not very convincing. Now, that being said, I did find a little bit after the camp gets raided. I don't know if you remember this, Eric and Anton, but I know Eric probably does because he adores this movie. When all Ludlow cares about is finding his flask, and he like spots on the ground, he's like, ah. I did like that bit. That really worked for me.
Because it shows how he's concerned about the wrong fucking things.
And then he just says very casually, he's like, "Oh, that's not the problem. The problem is the raptors."
It's another absolute idiot who inherits a lot of money, who thinks they can do whatever they want. Like, I get what you're saying. Gary Oldman would have done it better, obviously, but
oh, for sure.
Also, my theories for why the film went in the direction of theme park in San Diego is this plants the seeds for striked up hype for an actual ride in Universal Studios. So,
oh, of course, Spielberg. He had that. He was getting that 2% on the back end.
How do we monetize, right?
Yeah.
Now, please tell us if this was such a weak villain, who's the real villain?
Vince Vaughn. He is directly responsible for getting all the characters killed. He's the villain of the movie. I'm not the only one that feels this way. You can look this up.
He calls the helicopter.
Yeah, eventually he smashes the radios. He lets all of the animals out of the camp.
Yeah.
He is the one that brings the baby T-Rex back. He's the villain. He gets everybody killed.
Him and Sarah, both their.
Oh, I already went in on Sarah.
I know, but
I was so rooting for him to get eaten. I was so disappointed when he made it out on the helicopter at the end. I really was.
He's not the villain, dude. He's not. I'm thinking about it, and listen. I've watched this movie consistently for years, dude. Yeah, he lets the animals out, but the only people they really attack are the bad people. Again, and he also makes the bad guy look like even more of an idiot when he's like, "Oh, well, this is just a part of what will," and then a triceratops blows through his tent.
But it's fair to say that the character is what allows more chaos to ensue.
Oh,
but to say that he's a bad guy or the villain, I think would need a little bit more conscious. You know what I'm saying?
We need a. I see what you're saying. Like, we need to have some sort of hint that there is devious action going on behind.
Which he is devious, but he's devious for the right people.
Toby Ziegler's blood is on his hands.
Who's Toby Ziegler?
The White House communications director in The West Wing, played by Richard Schiff.
Brother, I have not watched The West Wing.
Oh, well.
Sorry.
Anton knows.
West Wing. There we go.
Anton, what did you think of Ian Malcolm's daughter in this movie?
That was so. I remember when we were talking about this earlier on, and I completely agree. Why was she in the movie? Very, very bad acting, and did not move things along at all for the film.
No.
It was just corny, super corny.
Yeah, once in a while, Spielberg will really pull out some cornball shit, and this is one of the worst offenses of that. She was another one of the characters that I was just hoping she'd be eaten, and the gymnastics thing where she kicks the raptor. Eric, can you defend that, or are you just gonna?
Yeah, can you defend this character without trying? Yeah, please defend this character.
For sure. So it does a couple of things. One, it ties into the general motif of Jurassic Park, which is there is a kid in trouble. Okay, throughout all 6 of the movies, there's always a kid, and they're always in trouble. If you remove the kid from the movie, you prevent people who were our age at the time it's coming out from understanding or having someone who's a level playing field with us. Furthermore, I think she humanizes the Jeff Goldblum character from beyond just being this like rock star. Oh, I don't care about anything. No, he cares. He cares about his daughter. And in the book, I think there's a couple kids who are stowaways. So they probably wanted to incorporate that. But, if there isn't, it sounds bad, but if there isn't a child in danger, the stakes drop precipitously. You were cut. So they cut you from the team? I'm sorry. I mean, I'm a dad now, but I think that's fucking funny. Like she kicks a goddamn velociraptor, and her dad's response is, "They cut you from the team." I disagree. I mean, now listen, I'm also coming from I watch a lot of Hallmark movies around Christmas, and let me tell you, every fucking child actor in a Hallmark movie is hot garbage. They're the entire dumpster. So I might not be as sensitive to poor child actors as you guys are. But I think I've made my points.
Yeah, no, and I hear you. Just to counterpoint, one, humanization of the character. We know that there is a more grounded sense of humanization because he didn't want to go to the island at all except for his girlfriend. So he definitely cares for something more than himself. And then in terms of, yes, we do want to have that level playing field from a studio's perspective of having a child actor to be in there so that other child viewers can also see themselves within those shoes. That makes sense, but that doesn't necessarily, from a storytelling point of view, from like objectively like a good story, I don't think that necessarily needed to be a part of the formula. It just happened to be now every single film has had younger characters be a child in trouble for the film. My take.
Eric, I thought you made some good points, actually. The child in danger thing, it is featured in the novel. Still not sure why they didn't use a lot of other stuff from the novel. They decided to use that, but not some of the maybe more important stuff. But I thought they could have written her character better. Like in the original film, Lex, she knows how to work computers, and she actually does something smart by locking the doors to keep the raptors out at one point. And in this movie, we get an obvious adult stunt double doing gymnastics on some pipes in an abandoned building. But plowing ahead, nearly all of the characters are written in such a way that it's difficult to root for a lot of them. But that might also be because there's too many characters. There's a lot of just faceless mercenaries in this movie that get picked off, and you don't care. Like all of the deaths in the first Jurassic Park movie were meaningful. You weren't rooting for Nedry, so you weren't upset when he got killed. But you were like, there was only a handful of characters in the movie. So when Samuel L. Jackson's character, Arnold, got killed, you feel for him. When Muldoon gets killed, you feel for him. There's too many characters in this movie, and they just start, when they, the scene, which is actually a really great scene, we're going to touch on in the next reason, when they enter the long grass and the raptors are coming in, and they just start getting picked off one at a time, you don't feel anything for those characters.
Because I don't think you're supposed to. I mean, those are the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
I think what that scene does is it sets up the danger for the characters we care about. Ian Malcolm, because
that's fair.
If we don't have that whole thing with them going into the long grass, like all they'll hear is screams off in the distance, and that could be any number of dinosaurs. It doesn't necessarily have to be. So it sets up the raptors, going forward. Or at least that would be my counter argument to that.
No, I think that's a good counterpoint. I'm loving this debate. I really am. We're going to get to the third act of this movie. One of my issues, again, with the characters, though, is that several key characters, Tembo, the daughter, Vince Vaughn, they just disappear from the third act. They're not featured in the San Diego part of this movie. But as far as the characters go, Anton and I are not the only ones who felt this way. The late, great Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune, he only gave this 2 stars out of 4. And he said, quote, "I was disappointed as much as I was thrilled because The Lost World lacks a staple of Steven Spielberg's adventure films, exciting characters. Even the original Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs, not to mention the human beings, had more distinct personalities than they have here. Save for superior special effects, The Lost World comes off as recycled material." And that brings us to the third reason of why this movie wasn't better, which is the uneven set pieces. This movie did start something called the recycling trope, which is, we didn't get to use that idea in the last movie. Let's cram it into this one. Now, that can be both good and bad, right? Sometimes there's good ideas that you just don't get to use, and you get to use it here. I think one of the strengths of this film is that the CGI is even better. than the original. Eric, you mentioned this earlier in the recording. The CGI in this movie holds up really well for a movie from 1997. The final shot, which is in broad daylight, and that's usually the hardest shot to achieve with CGI, when you see all the dinosaurs on the island, when John Hammond is giving his monologue, and you see all the different dinosaurs and the pterodactyl spreads its wings, it looks great.
So there was something that I kind of wanted to bring up super quick about that was Jurassic Park is also really known for its practical effects, right?
Yes.
Like the puppets and stuff like that. And I honestly thought you guys were going to bring this up more. There's a lot of scenes where they're just like looking through the camera, you know what I mean? Where they're just kind of like staring at something. And I think that's partially because of A, their budget, right? And B, the fact that they do use a lot of practical effects still. Like I think when they let the baby T-Rex go, I think those are all giant, robotic puppets and stuff like that. And I know they continued using them in Jurassic Park 3. So
yeah,
you're right. Like it really sets a high standard, almost to like the point of I'm probably going to get heat for this, but like The Thing, right? Like that was a pioneer in practical effects. And I think Jurassic Park has a very good marriage of both practical and CGI.
You're not going to get any heat here about The Thing. You're absolutely right. One of the reasons why The Thing holds up is because of all. Oh no, The Thing, all the effects in that hold up really well because they're practical, and they did such a good job with it.
Yeah, completely agree.
Eric's absolutely right about the blend of practical versus CGI here. I just wanted to note, and Anton, you mentioned how much more CGI there was in this movie versus the first one. Now, obviously, 4 years, especially back then, is like a quantum leap for CGI, but it's impressive what they were able to achieve. And Spielberg really, not that we didn't already know he was a gifted filmmaker, but he really knew what he was doing when it came to these effects. But as far as the set pieces go, let's talk about what was good. The double T-Rex attack on the trailer, it's one of the best things Spielberg has ever filmed.
Gorgeous.
I think it's on par with everything in the first film. It really is.
And
it's the best part of the movie.
You guys complained about the script, but I just love when like the guys try to save him and he's like, anything else? And he's like, yeah, 2 double cheeseburgers, no onions on mine. And like, I understand that I was young when this came out, but that's still funny to me. And that's the kind of bullshit that Pat, like, I know you or I would do that if our lives were in jeopardy.
Yes. No, I didn't hate everything about the script. This is absolutely the best part of the movie. I could rewatch this scene endlessly. Again, the trailer going over the cliff, it really is terrifying and Spielberg, he really knows how to use sound. When Julianne Moore is lying on the glass and you just start to hear the cracking, it's so effective, especially if you've got a good sound system. This movie's a great surround sound movie to watch. It really is. It competes with everything in the first movie, that scene. The raptors in the tall grass, genuinely great. The dinosaur roundup when InGen lands and they start corralling all the dinosaurs with the Mercedes toy-looking vehicles that they were hoping to sell in stores for years after. It looks great, especially, again, it's in broad daylight. It's very, very effective CGI. There's very few action scenes that fall flat, except for the San Diego sequence of this movie. We already touched on the gymnastics scene. I don't think we need to say anything else about that. So let's talk about the San Diego sequence. To me, it feels like a completely different movie. It always feels tacked on to me every time I watch this movie. That's because it is. The entire San Diego sequence was very much an 11th hour decision by Spielberg. He originally conceived of the idea and he wanted to use it actually in a sequel to this movie. But at the last minute, he decided to use it here after he realized he probably wouldn't be directing any of the sequels to this himself. They go full King Kong. It's a struggle to get through. There's way too much comedy. And I already mentioned this. There's a bunch of really important characters that are just missing from it.
Anton, you made a face when he said there's way too much comedy.
I agree. I think the biggest part is just everything that, Patrick's touching on there. It's a shame just because I think there's a lot of weight that could have been brought upon having dinosaurs being on U.S. soil for the first time. In the same awe or in the same beauty and magic that you have in the first film of seeing dinosaurs for the first time, trying to capture that with that same level in the second film just didn't hit for what should have been like historically a fantastic sequence in San Diego. So it was just a shame. That's all.
So something's just struck me here about your guys' perspective, because you guys haven't seen any of the Jurassic Worlds, right?
I saw the first one.
I have actually. I'm up to
Did you
speed.
see all of them?
Oh yeah, Chris Pratt, it's all good.
I mean, yeah, I know. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love Chris Pratt, and for a lot of them, like, I understand. But I think they handled dinosaurs being in the human world kind of worse than San Diego. I get what you're saying. But, like, for me, again, then this might be my nostalgia talking. It was the logical conclusion to where the hubris was leading to. Right? So we have the dinosaurs on the island. If anything goes terribly wrong, they're on a frickin' island. But wait, people have to spend more money to get to an island. We can make more money if we bring the dinosaur onto the mainland, and we can control this dinosaur because, we made it. I think it's another example of hubris. And I mean, I enjoy this epic. I don't like when the dog dies, but I've seen this movie multiple times. I think I Am Legend is a great movie, but I won't watch it again because the dog dies. I'm a big proponent of never killing the dog. And I watch this all the time because I think it's hilarious. When the parents are arguing, they're like, it's the fish tank. The kids see the fish tank. You say there's dinosaurs, and then there's a dinosaur outside. I know that that's like kind of corny, but I still find it funny. And I feel like in the 90s, it was funny. I understand there may be being too much comedy in that, but people still die. I don't know. And I'm a fan of dark comedy too. So maybe that's just me.
No, that's very fair.
Yeah, that's fair. You make a good point about the hubris of it all. I thought it could have been executed better. And here's a good example. When the T-Rex, they discovered that the T-Rex has killed the crew of the cargo ship, it doesn't make any logical sense. There's no way the T-Rex could have fit into the crew quarters and killed them all. It's a pretty glaring plot hole. Now, there's a deleted scene where velociraptors, it's revealed, actually got loose on the ship, and they were going to be the ones that killed the rest of the crew because they got transported along with the T-Rex. But Spielberg ended up cutting that out. And I just don't think it makes sense to include the dead crew. It's an example of just sloppy storytelling in the third act.
I always thought it was the baby T-Rex in conjunction with the big T-Rex working together to like kill the crew. That's still kind of far-fetched. I get what you're saying, but that's...
I just remember thinking at the time, how did the T-Rex kill the whole crew? Like when you see the arm holding onto the wheel, it's like, how did that happen? It's Spielberg. Speaking of deleted stuff that never got featured in the movie, there are 2 additional action scenes: a pterodactyl attack on the helicopters, and the T-Rex is attacking the high hide thing.
High hide. Yeah,
the high hide. They were both storyboarded, but they were never filmed. And Spielberg also regretted excluding a scene from the script that would have depicted characters on motorcycles attempting to flee raptors, similar to a sequence in the novel. An alternate version of this would be included in the 2015 film Jurassic World.
That's what I was laughing about.
Yeah. So we talked about...
Because Amblin Entertainment had part in Jurassic World, so it's so funny that like a lot of their cut ideas they just threw into Jurassic World.
This is a common trend, not just in this franchise, but in many, where they the James Bond franchise famously does this, where they have an idea for a movie, they don't use it, and they recycle it years later. We're going to try to wrap this up now. We talked about why this movie wasn't better: the script, the uneven characters, the uneven set pieces. Let's talk about whether or not we liked it. And it begins with a fundamental question. Is this movie really as disappointing as we all remember? Or are we judging this by Spielberg standards, which are immeasurably higher than most filmmakers? Eric.
So I was kind of hoping you would come to me last, but I will certainly...
Would you like to go last?
Yeah. Can I go last?
You can go last.
Guys both give your statements? And
I can go first here. One, I know that there's a critical take and a critical lens that I'll go in to this film with, and Patrick, you made a really good point. Am I holding it higher to a standard because Spielberg is attached to this film? Yes, because of that expectation of what's going to be what I expect in a film. Now, just because I have that critical lens or I have those expectations doesn't mean that I can't also look at a film and say, did I enjoy it? Being able to tell the most amazing story, being able to have proper cinematography, or things making sense doesn't necessarily have to mean that I didn't enjoy the film. And I feel like that shouldn't take away from someone being able to enjoy the film. It's just that from my perspective, I feel like it could have been better. I feel like there was such a beauty to the first film that there was there was a great balance between what was humorous versus what were the stakes that I just didn't see captured again in The Lost World, that I feel like deserves a second look at it. Now, with that, nostalgia has been touched on a lot, and I was telling this to Patrick before. I always like to think of nostalgia as a double-edged sword. If we hold on too closely to the nostalgia of things that we remember from the past that we really enjoyed, it can often fog up what we objectively understand and contextualize as what could have been better. But at the same time, it allows us to also look at it and say, well, for the time, it actually was pretty good. And for the time, for what it put out, it was actually really enjoyable. And I don't think that should take away from anyone's enjoyment of a film. But with that, I thought like I can watch that film and say, yeah, I have a good time. And of the Jurassic Park films, out of all of them to this date, the first two are still my favorite. That's me.
What is your rating,
And
Anton?
I just want to say, can I just say that was very eloquent. And
Thank you.
I appreciate that answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So C-. That's me. All that to say C-. Patrick, you next.
Despite everything that I had to say about this movie, despite the fact that I can't help but compare it to the first movie, which I would give an A+. I think the first movie is a perfect movie. It's undoubtedly one of the 50 or whatever 100 best films I've ever seen. I find it endlessly rewatchable. It holds up so well. It's one of Spielberg's crowning achievements on what is, some people don't think he's the best filmmaker of all time. I think I do, just because of how many of my favorite movies he's made. I have to say he's probably my favorite filmmaker just by default. I think this movie's fine. To me, it's the textbook definition of a safe, conservative sequel that it delivers everything that worked for the first movie. It just tries to go a lot bigger without really doing anything particularly new. Now, it's a little darker in parts, but they were very much trying to capitalize on some of the things that made the first movie work so well. But that being said, I like it about 50% as much as the first one. There's plenty to like here, and you absolutely still get touches of that Spielberg magic. The highs are high, but the lows are low. I don't think it's a bad movie at all. I think it's a very standard sequel. It's the best Jurassic Park sequel of all the ones that I've seen. I give it a C. Anton, I think I liked it a little bit more than you. It's not great. It's not terrible. It supports my theory that most sequels that get made are just okay. Now, before I give this to Eric, I want to give a couple of points. Spielberg said about this movie later on, he said, quote, "My sequels aren't as good as my originals because I go onto every sequel I've made and I'm too confident. This movie made $1 gazillion dollars, which justifies it. So I come in like it's going to be a slam dunk and I wind up making an inferior movie to the one before," end quote. Here's my theory for this movie. Before I give it to you, Eric. Spielberg, when he made this movie, he was founding his own studio, DreamWorks. He was coming off the first Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. He basically takes the next 3 years off, right? He wants to spend more time with his family. He wants to make his own studio. I want to take things in a left-hand turn really quick. This is the moment when he should have made the fourth Indiana Jones movie. Harrison Ford was still very much in his prime. Spielberg was still very much in his prime. This is when we should have gotten the fourth Indiana Jones movie, and we didn't, and it will always be a missed opportunity for me. Eric, take it away.
First off, I I liked what you said, but I feel like both of you guys are comparing it to Spielberg films, which isn't unfair. Obviously, it's a Spielberg film.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I wanted to say. That it was very interesting that you say that when you were in the Matrix Reloaded podcast where you talked about how the Wachowski brothers just like didn't have anybody to rein them in. Do you think that's kind of similar to what was going on with Steven Spielberg? Like it was just like, oh, you're going to make a hit either way, kid. So, go do you.
To some degree, yes. I can probably not on this podcast, but this is a really interesting discussion. This book that I've been reading, The Men Who Would Be King, just to give it another shout out because it's really good. I'm almost done and I really recommend it to any of the listeners and to you guys. You'd find it fascinating. It really goes into Spielberg's dark side. Not to say that he's portrayed as a bad guy because he's not a bad guy. I think he's a good guy, but it really highlights how creatively greedy a filmmaker can be. And he got to the point with his own studio, DreamWorks, where he wanted to make so many movies that he was going out of his way to block other filmmakers from making movies so he could, because he wanted to make certain projects. And he not screwed other filmmakers over, but he definitely blocked other filmmakers' ideas for other films. But I don't want to get too sidetracked. But to answer your question, Eric, there's no one that's going to tell Spielberg no.
Right. I mean...
Right.
But I just found an interesting parallel with a previous episode. I just wanted to shout it out.
It's a really fascinating point that you bring up. No, there's no one that's going to tell him no. But to his credit, he has such a high batting average that why would you want to?
True. My point of contention is the fact that this film is shit on so much. So to put this in perspective, Jurassic Park 3, which I think we can all agree is a hot garbage film. I don't know if you've seen it. Like I really don't. Like,
I agree with you.
It's cool, whatever. Like it's not a very good film. It gets and I also don't like using Rotten Tomatoes, but this I think is a caricature of what the problem in terms of perception around this film is. So Jurassic Park 3 has a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes. This movie, The Lost World, has a 51%. I don't think it's that bad. I don't know why people hate this movie as much as they hate it. Yes, we could talk about why wasn't it better, but you guys have brought up in previous podcasts that like the sequel is seldom ever going to be better than the first movie. We shouldn't be expecting that. So, and in tandem with that argument, Jurassic World, which makes even less sense, has a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think those films are even. I think they're like 70 is a C, right?
Well, so what's funny is I told this to Patrick before. I actually enjoyed 3 more than 2 because it was a return to more of the original formula and the characters.
Eric, I'm on your side. I'm on your side here, Eric. I'm on your side. I have to admit, Anton, I have not seen Jurassic Park 3 in probably 20 years.
But not to say it's a good film.
No, and I'm not saying that you're saying that. I just still think that this film is more superior than that film. And I mean, I don't, obviously, that could be a whole other episode, but my problem is that with all the flaws that this movie has, there are way worse movies out there. And I think it's unfair that it gets compared to what is, and you're right, essentially a perfect movie. Of course this movie wasn't going to, but rating it at such a low level and giving it so much hate, I think is unfounded. I really don't think it's as bad as people say. And with all of and I'm a devout supporter of this movie. I will defend this movie. I defend a lot of movies that I'm basically just nostalgic about. But people really hate this movie and I don't get it. And I feel like it's more of I think it's more of a bandwagon thing, like critics can be critics, but have they ever fucking made a movie?
No.
Do they know? You know what I mean? And that's my same problem with like food critics. I think this film gets a super bad rep and I don't think it deserves it. And I think future films make way less sense than this film. I mean, Jurassic World, here's my point. So at the end of this movie, John Hammond is like, these creatures need our absence, not our interference. And then in the next film, Hammond apparently, in Jurassic World, Hammond apparently has a partner. And the partner is like, I'm fulfilling John Hammond's wishes to rebuild the park. And it's like, no, he never wanted that. And that film has a 70% when there's more plot holes than The Lost World. Am I saying it's perfect? Am I saying it's as good as the first one? Absolutely not. But it's a good movie. It is not the dumpster fire that I think people make it out to be. And that's kind of my problem.
I think that's very fair. No, I agree with you. I've read online, some people feel this is Spielberg's worst movie. I think that's very harsh.
Very harsh.
I don't think it's a great movie, but would you say C is a fair rating considering the issues that we brought up?
I would say 65, 70%. You know, not something that's so unwatchable I'd never watch it again, but at the same time, not to the same caliber as I hold my all-time favorite movies or some of the greatest movies of all time, for sure.
What is your rating for this movie? A to
I
F
would say
scale.
7.5. So like a 70, 75%. I'm not saying it's great, but it's not that bad.
A to F scale?
You know?
Solid C.
How do you compare it to our rating?
Solid C.
Oh, so you agree with us?
I would say C plus B minus. So a little bit higher than where you guys place it, but not too much higher.
So we don't disagree.
I thought you guys were going to put it
all.
like a D, you know?
No. So you don't disagree that much with us at all?
I don't, but like the public perception of this film, dude, like it's low and I don't understand it. I don't. I think that's the core of why I'm so defensive about it.
I think most sequels suffer because they have to hold to the signatures of the original with ever diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. Like if you think Alien to Aliens brought so many new elements, this movie recycled some of the key elements of the original. And to your point, Eric, it's just our own biases. Everyone's going to compare this to the original. Whether that's fair or not, maybe that's another debate. But I definitely agree with you that this movie is not as bad as some people make it out to be. I think it's absolutely the best of the Jurassic Park sequels. I haven't seen the third one in a very long time. I didn't like it, but Anton, maybe I should rewatch it. Jurassic World, which came 15 years later, I did see that one. I thought it was okay. I didn't see any of the sequels. I know there was a few of them. I didn't see Jurassic World Vegas Vacation, but I'm told it's horrible.
Oh my God. But I haven't either.
Yeah, I didn't get around to seeing that one. This has been a great debate. Eric, I'm glad you're here to support this film.
I'm glad to be here, man. This was super fun. And as you guys probably know, I'm sort of your biggest fan at this point. I've seen every episode inside and out. So you've
heard far too much of our voices,
but really a huge pleasure to have you here, Eric. Really,
yeah.
No, and it was a great conversation. I'm glad we were able to have it, and I hope that in the future, you can bring me on if you guys haven't got Halle Berry yet.
Fair.
Yeah, I have to tell you, we will bump you for Halle Berry.
That's fair. That's what I'm saying. I totally get it. I get it.
We'll do it.
But please have me on again.
Yeah, you're always welcome back. Is there any other mediocre films that you'd like to defend? Can I interest you in Spider-Man 3?
So here's the thing: is that so Spider-Man was one of the first DVDs I ever owned. And I have a coworker who's 23 and he thinks that's absolutely fucking hilarious because he's never owned a DVD. You know, it was Spider-Man, The Fifth Element, and like a couple other films. Yeah. These are the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen it. I saw it in theaters, but like, yeah, I'd probably just have to rewatch him.
Okay. That's supposed to be one of the ones that we're covering this season.
Epic.
Anton, as far as our next episode, it's technically your turn to pick. We kind of inserted The Lost World here because Eric was so hyped up about defending this movie's honor, and I have to say he did a very admirable job of doing so.
Very admirable job.
Do you have anything in mind for our next movie that we're going to cover?
I think it's time for us to dive into the world of superheroes again? And can we bring let's shed more light on Superman 2.
Superman 2. That will be our oldest movie that we're covering to date. That is a 40-plus-year-old movie. I think I'm dating myself when I think of the early 2000s as not that old, but it's pretty old. Regardless.
All right. Well, I'm ready for it.
Best
Excellent.
of luck, gentlemen.
Thank you, Eric. Well, that's it for this edition of Why Wasn't It Better? We will see you next time. And Eric, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Huge pleasure.
Pleasure's
Thank
all
you.
mine. Pleasure's all mine, gentlemen.
We'll see you next time.